Good evening here, coming to you from my Ultapan office in New Jersey, and I'm here to talk a little bit about multi-generational trauma, which is a huge topic, and how these cycles of, in this case, violence or control, or domestic violence and domestic control can get passed on through our family history, through the cycles and systems that our family has been set up in, and cause unnecessary harm over and over again. So we have something called defensive response cycles, which I love to talk about, and I learned about these more in depth in my somatic experiencing training. And so what happens is we have these natural impulses to fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Fight is pretty self-explanatory. It's, if we feel threatened in any kind of way, we're going to have a reaction where we're going to lean into it and we're going to fight the situation. And typically when this happens, our nervous system goes up to hyper arousal and gets activated, and we get prepared to fight for our life. Another one is flight. So when this happens, it's also our nervous system gets a bit more activated, and we get energy to run and to leave the situation and fight the threat. And that's another way that we keep ourselves safe. Excuse me. Another defensive response cycle that happens is we have freezing, and this oftentimes happens in situations where animals in nature do this. When you see them play dead, when they're feeling threatened that another animal is going to come in and eat them. And there's some really cool videos actually on YouTube about this happening, and it's really cool to see a visual. But basically, when we feel threatened, and oftentimes our system doesn't feel like it can safely flight or fight, what our body will do to keep us safe is it will freeze. And this happens a lot in sexual abuse and sexual violence, especially with kids, teens, and also actually adults. And the last one is fawning, and that is where we will caretake the person or people who are abusing us because we want to keep them happy so that we feel like the abuse will stop. So I'm going to talk about specifically domestic violence and household violence and how this can get passed on generationally. And I've seen this show up actually in different aspects of my own life, and really have had to work hard to understand this. And so basically what happens if I'm a child and I feel threatened in any way, and I'm not in a position to really defend myself, which is children in general. I feel like, we're dependent upon our caregivers for our entire survival. So if abuse is coming from our caregiver, it can be very complicated to understand how to, as a child, attempt to keep ourselves safe, but also keep connected and stay attached to the caregiver who is helping our survival. We're here because they're feeding us, they're housing us oftentimes, clothing us, or teaching us certain aspects about life and how to be in the world. Right? So it's a complicated attachment pattern as well, where we feel like the source of our pleasure and connection is also the source of our pain, and danger. And that can create a complicated attachment pattern. So oftentimes when this happens at some point in our life, in our childhood, and I'll speak to, let's say, physical violence at this point. So and it's absolutely passed down. So let's just say that, for example, there was a parent who didn't actually have an opportunity to fight back, or to yell, or to scream, or to have like a physical reaction to a parent who was either yelling at them, raging at them, physically abusing them, what they've had to do, because nature gives us these great defensive response patterns that can help us to really defend ourselves, in the sense of real true harm, right? So if we're not really able to use those because the complication of, using them with or against or at one of our parents creates this like complicated double bind inside, where it's like we kind of know that the body is telling us to do something. At the same time, our mind is telling us it's probably not the right thing to do. So what can happen is we can have all of this pent up, anger or, whatever the emotion is, and not really have a place to release it. We learn to suppress it. And our brain learns to override what feels natural and right to ourselves in our body, which can feel very, very complicated and can be also misunderstood oftentimes. And people who have had this happen can a lot of the time have problems in their relationships. They can feel misunderstood by friends. They oftentimes have reactions that are disproportionate to the events at hand. And what the body is trying to do oftentimes is it finds different ways when, we're suppressing it, whatever that is, for survival, because we can't afford to let that come out and afford getting into, or abandonment really, or rejection from our caregivers because we need them. And also it's not safe a lot of the time for a little kid to, fight back to a big parent. Kids, we don't have that kind of power when we're kids. So, oftentimes we just learn to find different ways out of survival to push down these emotions. And there's certain things that we do in the moment to survive that can cause us lots of pain down the road. And they might have helped us in that moment, the ways that we cope to survive, but yet they're not really adaptive coping skills that really will take us through our life successfully. And so, for example, if this is me and I'm getting, physically abused in my childhood and I have all of this anger inside of me, let's just say I'm out on the street walking through, I live in New York City, so walking through New York City and, someone bumps into me, I can, on a good day, let's say, not really having necessarily this be my story directly, I can, just be like, wow, that was kind of messed up, and just shake it off and move on. If I have all of this pent up anger inside and I'm looking for a way to release it, oftentimes I can have an over amplified reaction to a situation that really didn't, warrant it, because I'm not in that kind of danger or pain, and I can know that, but my system doesn't know. The nervous system doesn't actually know. And so what can happen is we have these moments in life where we can get triggered, or we can, sort of be in different ways tired of like pushing down our emotions and feel like we're in a safe relationship. And these feelings and these defensive response cycles can try to complete themselves, because that's what they want to do, and that's what we need to allow them to do as adults. They'll try to complete themselves in any way they can. And again, sometimes this is in ways that causes our relationships to have harm, because we don't understand what's happening and what's going on, and B, we really are just trying to survive, and and sometimes we don't feel like we have as much control over that. So in generational trauma, what ends up happening is a lot of this gets passed on generationally. The coping skills that our parents had are oftentimes the coping skills that we pick up. And they're oftentimes, as much as we maybe don't like them as children, we can take them into our own families because it's what we know and it's what our body remembers. And, we can feel a lot of shame and guilt, I think people do parenting a lot of the time, because they're doing the same thing to their parents that they feel like was done to them. And they know it wasn't helpful or effective when it was done to them. And and yet they feel a loss of control, and just out of reaction will develop these patterns that they take into their own families, and the cycle continues. So what I want to put a plug in and talk about, and I'm going to wind this video down and create some others as well about this, is to really seek out help for this and in breaking this pattern. It's a very workable pattern, and it's something that in therapy with a somatic experiencing practitioner, there's ways that we can help you to release or to complete the defensive response cycle and feel the release that you weren't able to do back as a child. And that can feel so satisfying, so that we're not holding on and walking around with all this anger. And there's a lot of really simple tools that I will get to in some other videos of how we can do this. And I would also recommend really trying to talk about this with the people in your life as well, and to try to understand a little bit more about what's going on. I know therapy, regular, psychotherapy can be a great way in intellectually, connecting some dots and understanding ourselves, best. So there's lots of different tools out there that can help us to really live in the present moment and not be carrying around all of the stuff that we've been like wearing backpacks through the generations and passing down that backpack to the younger generations. What we can learn to do is really have natural actions and reactions to what's happening in the here and now, in the present day, that are reflective of those moments, rather than a whole line of history that is coming up, and that we've been carrying. So I hope this helps to understand just a little bit of multi-generational trauma. It's a really big conversation, and I think it's such an important one if we want to change ourselves and our reaction, and we want to change the world, and really do our part in changing some of these different patterns that have been passed. And I see this a lot in the broader picture too, in the political world, in history, in wars being created. It's really, a lot of this is past stuff that hasn't really had an opportunity to heal itself, to really get completed, to sort of get resolved, and we just keep carrying this around. So I love to talk about this. I'm actually writing a book about this now, and I would love to hear your thoughts and comments about this, and if you identify, and if there's any instances that this might be able to help you understand yourself and your family patterns better. That I would love that. I think that would be great. Thanks again.